Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Oller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Welcome back to the BuckeyeXtra football podcast. It's Monday, September 9th. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Bill Rabinowitz, Rob Oller. We are here to discuss Ohio State's 56-0 rout of Western Michigan on Saturday night, the first shutout by the Buckeyes since 2019. That was a 42-0 win over Cincinnati 5 years ago. The Buckeyes had no trouble with Western Michigan, which on a college football Saturday in which a handful of Big Ten or Midwestern schools were playing against MAC opponents, I suppose it was no small thing to just run away from the jump. Obviously, if you were tracking the scoreboard, Notre Dame was upset by Northern Illinois. Penn State had a difficult time at home against Bowling Green, was trailing that game even at halftime. So Ohio State made easy work of Western Michigan, which sort of the events elsewhere on the docket maybe colors your vantage point of what transpired at the Horseshoe. How do you guys feel about what we watched in week 2 with the Ohio State Buckeyes?
Well, I saw the end of the Northern Illinois game right before Ohio State started. And the thought did cross my mind, having watched the Bowling Green Penn State game, thought, could something funky happen here? Could this be a bit of a game? I mean, I didn't think so, but, strange things happen. No. There was like Western Michigan, they had a good start to their drive, the first drive, and then that was pretty much it. I mean, the Ohio State just dominated from start to finish. The outcome was never in doubt. Ohio State wanted to get off to a fast start. They did. Defense was suffocating. The offense scored touchdowns on 5 of its first 6 possessions. As close to perfection as you're going to get, really. Again, against a MAC team, and you have to kind of couch it that way, but they look good.
I think it really helped that they had to have these slow starts almost for a year, a little over a year. And I know every week they kept saying we can't keep having these slow starts, but this, they entered a game in which Western Michigan was clearly overmatched. So if you're going to get a fast start, you're probably going to do it against a Western Michigan or an Akron, although they didn't do it against Akron, versus a Penn State or some, a Big Ten team. So I think that motivation was pretty strong. I thought it was interesting that, we saw some Chip Kelly play calling come out of this. And I think at one point early, they had 4 tight ends on the field. They were very heavy there. And it's hard to see how they could get better. I mean, I know quarterback Will Howard said that he left a couple out there, and he did. He missed Jeremiah Smith on a long one, which could have been 6. He wasn't perfect, but he didn't have to be. And I'm sure we'll get into the run game, but it was impressive. And the defense, they came they got their first shutouts, as Joey said, since 2019. Now they came about 3 yards. Missed field goal, 3-yard missed field goal away from losing that. Didn't Western? He pushed it just a little right, the long.
Yeah, raised off the right upright.
Oh yeah, that's right. It did hit it. So, but you know what? The bounce went their way.
I mean, how many times in past years have they not gotten that? The other team kicks a meaningless field goal.
Right. I mean, Akron kicks 2 long ones.
We joked in the press box after that missed field goal that was karma in a way, because if you're playing Ohio State and you're kicking a field goal in the first quarter and you're trying to go for an upset, it always feels as if a team is mostly trying to avoid the shutout rather than actually attempting to win the game. So it felt like a ball don't lie kind of field goal.
I forget what the down and distance was, but I don't think it was crazy. I think it was maybe 4th and 5 or something like that. It wasn't. You gotta look that up.
It was a manageable 4th down. I don't recall the exact down distance either, Bill, but it did. I thought
4th and 3. But I might be wrong there. Anyhow, that's my impressions. I mean, every element was clicking.
And I know you could focus on the level of competition, but they had games last year where they didn't play spectacular teams in non-conference. Youngstown State, Western Kentucky. They only had 14 points in the first quarter against Youngstown State. They just looked very pedestrian, even though they ended up winning 35-7 in that game. And then the following week against Western Kentucky, they did have a big second quarter, but only 7 points in the first quarter. Rob, you and I both looked it up on Saturday at the press box, but that was the highest scoring first quarter Ohio State had since 2022 against Indiana. They only 3 times last year had they even scored multiple touchdowns in the first quarter. So this was a much quicker start than what we've seen really from Ohio State since C.J. Stroud was the quarterback.
Well, the record, it was 4th and 3.
Yeah. So very manageable.
Manageable. Yeah. Could have, if you're trying to win, I go with Joey with this. If you're trying to win, or at least be the pretense of trying to win, you go for it there. You don't just kind of take the easy 3 points.
That's true. I get, the other side of that, just to cut the small guy a break, the little guy a break, is if you don't get it, the morale is pretty bad too that early. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you can argue both ways. I think I'd go for it, but if you can get 3 points, you feel like you can score on these guys.
You could take the lead course.
You know what? Doesn't really matter. 56-3 or 56 zip.
Right. Take the Lee Corso picture when his Indiana team was ahead of the juggernaut Ohio State team. Takes the picture of Indiana up 3-0 or 7-0 for posterity.
Yeah, Akron could have last week.
3-0. Remember when they played Miami and it was, I think, 5-0, and it ended up being like 76-5 or something like that. It was
something.
That's right.
But
I'm curious, not to tangent, but give the listener something they can't get. They weren't in that post game room. I have yet to see really Ryan Day light up. He hasn't smiled much after either win. I thought he was pretty businesslike. Now, not that he's always real effusive after games, but he's all business. I don't know if this is sort of the tough guy. We're trying to be tough. We're trying to, I don't know what it is, but he did not seem real jovial, joking, even real happy. Again, maybe I don't know what your impression was. I'm not saying he was like upset. I kind of thought there'd be a little more there about his offense. He wasn't super dynamic talking about the blowout or the offense. Maybe I'm misreading it. That was just my take. Thoughts from you?
I thought he was much happier or much more satisfied after Saturday's game than he was against Akron. Akron, you could tell he was like, well, we got a lot of work to do. I think after this game, it was more like, I'm not going to let these guys relax, get complacent. But it was not any dissatisfaction. Look, he as he always does, he praised the crowd. He praised the energy on the bench that he saw. I do disagree with you in the sense I thought he was quite satisfied with the performance, but also always on guard to not allow complacency to set in.
I think there's more or less 2 Ryan Days you get in post game after wins. You get the routine blowout win over a non-conference team, and he's not really one to take much of a victory lap or strut in those situations. I find him a lot of times when they're discussing a beatdown of a middling Big Ten or non-conference foe, pretty flat line. And then there's when he actually wins a big game or a bigger game like Notre Dame last year or Penn State, where you can just feel his sigh of relief. It's almost less enthusiasm about the win, but just like you can finally let your guard down after the week of tension. You can kind of feel like a rag being squeezed a little bit where the emotion comes out. And especially, obviously, the Notre Dame one is infamous last year, but it always feels either routine win or like huge sigh of relief after a win. There's never there's not a Spurrier-like quality to him where he's going to flex from the podium.
That's fair. I mean, we really don't know how he reacts after Michigan, which would be the biggest game of the last 3 years.
In 19, his first win, it was definitely more in the relief category. That was a big sigh of relief.
Yeah.
Well, that was when Harbaugh made the third base comment, right?
No, that was Harbaugh had made some comments, I believe, in 19, but
it was a 21.
21 was the third base, and Harbaugh made the third base comment after the win. He made that in his post game.
Yeah. That's like incredible salt in the wound. Incredible salt in the wound.
Anyhow, I mean, again, I'm not saying he was dissatisfied with the win. It was just, I think Joey nailed it. It was fair. Just he's pretty flatline after these games, and he's no Urban Meyer, who was either completely crushed after losses. I still remember the Michigan State loss with Urban Meyer eating cold pizza, sitting on a golf cart in the bowels of the stadium, just sitting there with a wilting piece of pizza and just kind of sad sack eating pizza out of the box. But when he won, he was pretty dynamic. So
I never get
enough of that. Enough of that. What else are we going to talk about? 56.
Well, I was saying, I don't. Do you?
Into everything.
People talked about this when Nick Saban was the coach at Alabama, that he would try to communicate with his team through his media availability and his press conference. I never get the sense that Ryan Day attempts to do anything like that. I don't know how you guys feel, but that's maybe partly why you don't see the sort of the catastrophic look or him chewing somebody out or really pumping anything up super high. He's pretty analytical, I think, even keeled in a lot of those settings, because I think I don't know, it's always been my impression.
I kind of think that Ryan Day is always going to be nothing but relief after wins until he beats Michigan. And that's going to be a huge relief. And I think if and when that happens this year, and then let's say they win the Big Ten championship, then I think it'll be like joy and happiness. But I think that right now, until he beats Michigan, that nothing is going to be anything more than just relief and kind of, because I think that everyone knows it doesn't really matter that much until that game. Almost regardless of how good Michigan is, or how good, let's say, the Oregon win if they win it, or Penn State. I just think that everything is a prelude to that game. And I think they've kind of like held their breath in a way, just like preparing, hoping, all that stuff. And that will be, if they beat them, huge relief. But I think then you'll probably see a more relaxed day and somebody who's more willing to just kind of be happy after a game.
Could be. The most I ever saw him be animated was after the close loss to Clemson in 19.
Yeah,
he was, and of course, he felt they got screwed out of that, and he was beside himself. He wasn't really as much angry as just like I can't believe what just happened here in terms of the calls that went against us. But he was. I find these guys get a little more closed off the longer they go. I think there's a lot of scar tissue. They take some hits from the media and they just close down. I remember John Cooper used to have just very open, whatever you want to think about Coop. His press conferences, his weekly press conferences were very open. I think he even had some open practices, and then he took some hits, and then it got less and less and less and less access. So that's just. Now, Joey may have a different take because he grew up in the Pete Carroll era. Pete was like, he's sending out invitations to practice for celebrities to show up on the sidelines. But the longer guys are there, I think they get a little more closed off.
Yeah, a little bit of a tightening up quality.
Yeah.
Let's to get into the bare bones of Ohio State's route of Western Michigan. Obviously, I think there were some times maybe against Akron where they just looked okay. They were certainly more impressive against Western Michigan. Where do you guys see them? What caught your eye more? We talked about the fast starts earlier, but just in the overall performance, where did they maybe flex their muscles the most, do you think?
Bill can chime in on this, sure, but I thought the running game was the biggest takeaway. Not only the line played better, but I just thought the running backs, especially Judkins, he showed what everyone had been talking about when he came in, that he might even, be better than Trevion Henderson. I'm not ready to sign off on that yet, but he looked very good. He's just got a real good vision. So I would say the run game, I don't know if we have this stat in. I think I threw it in my column that it was the first time since 2019 that they had 6 rushing touchdowns. Maryland in 2019, they scored like 70 points against Maryland, I think, that year.
Yeah, the run game to me, and specifically offensive line, to me, made the biggest jump because all the other parts of the team played reasonably well against Akron. I thought the run game was so-so against Akron, and I thought it was much better. They didn't have Donovan Jackson, who's their best lineman, so Austin Sarabelt obviously played better. There were some gaping holes against Western Michigan that we didn't see really against Akron. I mean, just huge holes that we could have run through, at least for 3 yards. And so I was impressed by that. Will Howard, I think, got hit once that I recall. He did a nice job evading pressure a couple times, but in terms of actually taking a hit, I think he got hit once. Um, and the receivers are really good. I mean, Jeremiah Smith. I mean, he's the real deal. Carnell Tate, really good. And Mecca Gbuka made some great catches. And we saw some Brandon Innes, which we know he's emerging as that very, very solid, dynamic fourth receiver that they've been looking for.
With the offensive line, I thought they were clearly better. They opened up more holes. They got more of a push. Felt like they moved the line of scrimmage more. Probably, I think one guy we haven't talked about really a whole lot, and it's probably been a little overlooked, especially in terms of their transfer class, because you bring in a quarterback like Will Howard, you bring in a 1,000-yard rusher like Quinshon Judkins, you bring in an All-American like Caleb Downs. Those tend to draw most of the headlines. But Seth McLaughlin has been a really, I think, productive player for them, and just that feels like a pretty big upgrade when they went from Carson Hinsman, who was starting in only his second year on campus, to a guy who started 3 years in the SEC.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things about that is, Joey, you wrote about this. He had his problems last year with the snaps. Well, late in the season with Bama. Well, I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
Haven't seen that this year. So at least, I mean, it'd be a problem if there were some bad snaps in these early games, but there haven't been. There might have been one last week.
It was a double clutch. You double clutched it.
Double clutch last week, but this week looked pretty good.
I was told, a little birdie told me, that a lot of these snap issues last year were not really his fault. It was more the fault of the cadence of the quarterback that kind of threw him off. We'll see. Look, if he doesn't have problems, then that can have some credence. If the problems resurface, then we say no, it's him. We'll see. But that's just what I was told.
I mean, Alabama did have a quarterback change last year, so you could give it some credence because Bryce Young was the starter in 21 and 22 when he didn't really have those issues, and then Jalen Milroe was the quarterback last year. I mean, Ryan Day, and that's what Ryan Day had chalked it up to in March. But yeah, we haven't seen those issues, and even setting aside those snapping issues, he had come in with a good reputation as a blocker. So I think the bet was that Ohio State could fix those snapping issues, and he would provide that blocking ability. I think that's so far proven to be the case through 2 games. But I think to me that's been a pretty noticeable upgrade.
And I think Alabama's actually still had some of those snapping issues with their center. That's what I saw this week on Twitter, at least.
So you're saying the variable could be
yeah, right. Like the math question, X is maybe not McLaughlin, it may be somebody else. But I agree with you, Joey. I think in some ways, I mean, look, he's not more important than the quarterback. Let's not kid ourselves.
No, and I wouldn't argue that.
But in terms of the offensive line, the center has to be the guy. He's got to be as Urban Meyer used to call it, the apex. He's got to be the guy that's obviously calling the blocking schemes and gets everyone on the same page. And to be fair to Seth McLaughlin, Akron was his first game as a Buckeye, and so he's playing next to 2 guys who'd never started. I don't think Saravel had a snap, not many at least. So he's playing against 2 guys. Tigra Shabola is really a natural tackle. You would expect to have some kind of growing pains, but I thought it was much better in the Western Michigan game. And if they can continue that against better competition, then you can check off Ohio State's 2 biggest questions entering the season: quarterback and offensive line. I'm not ready to do it after 2 MAC games, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, you probably won't be able to do it until get a little bit of feel till
Iowa.
They go to Michigan State. I had Michigan State last in my Big Ten power rankings, and Sparty goes to Maryland and wins. Which, how bad is Maryland? So you have to go to East Lansing. It's a Big Ten team, some Big Ten talent. They're coming off a big win. For them, I guess that's a big win, going to Maryland and win. Any win for Michigan State at this point is a big win. So you'll get a little feel up in East Lansing. But yeah, Iowa this is broken record. There's few teams that really are going to test them.
And we saw what happened with Oregon in their first 2 games. They barely beat Idaho. They barely beat Boise State this week. I'm assuming both those games are at home. I'm almost sure they were. And they got to play Oregon State this week, which could be interesting. That's going to be a real interesting one, right? I mean, all the bad blood, already bad blood in that. And now with Oregon bolting to the Big Ten and Oregon State essentially being homeless, that's going to have huge importance for Oregon State, especially. So we'll see if Oregon can right the ship, but they've been shaky. And we talked about Penn State having a rally to beat Bowling Green. Michigan gets drilled by Texas. So you look at the Big Ten and you go, Ohio State's clearly the best team. I mean, maybe throw USC in the mix too. But as of now, Ohio State's looking by far the best in the Big Ten.
The Oregon State game is going to be fascinating because, Bill, you mentioned Oregon State being homeless and not having a conference to be in at this point in time. They also lost Jonathan Smith, their coach,
right,
former quarterback for them 25 years ago or so. He leaves for Michigan State and brings a handful of players as well. So their roster got decimated. It's not just they don't really belong to a conference, but at least Washington State didn't lose their coach. Oregon State lost their former golden era quarterback to Michigan State, and then just Oregon feels like they're in a early season slumber. I'm curious if or when they'll wake up.
Joey and I were talking about this during the game that Ryan Day probably doesn't get enough credit for winning the little ones. I think he's 41-0 now. We've talked about this.
I think it's 40, but whatever. Yeah.
40 or 41-0 against non-ranked, unranked teams. You saw what happened around college football with unranked teams upsetting, Notre Dame. Although I don't know if Northern Illinois they're ranked now, but don't think they were. So Ryan Day does what he has to do against the really weak teams. And that's worth something.
It is. And I do, Rob, we did talk about that. I do think it's underappreciated, at least among his fan base, because you watch what's happened with Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman, and they just have these wild swings where they've had good wins. They win at Texas A&M week 1, and then they lose at home against Northern Illinois. They lost to Marshall a couple years ago after the Ohio State loss in 2022. They've had these high highs, and then they've had these obviously lower lows. Ohio State never has that. When you evaluate Ryan Day's track record here, you're largely critiquing and evaluating on the margins because the floor is so high. They never have these and you go into games, and it's never even a thought. Are they gonna lose to Western Michigan, or could they be any sort of upset jeopardy? That's never the case. So. Yes, I do think it's underappreciated, but it may not be as important as it used to be also in this new era of the college football, because you can make all the jokes about Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois and all that, but it doesn't knock them out of playoff contention. I mean, it's sort of the new world where you don't have to go unbeaten, or you don't have to go 11-1 to make the playoffs. You get a few mulligans, and Ryan Day doesn't usually need too many mulligans because they've avoided the big upsets, but it's not going to be as crippling as it used to be for teams.
Well, with Ohio State, I mean, you're right, because obviously you have 8 more teams in the playoff, but I do think that when you have a bad loss like Northern Illinois is to Notre Dame, and let's see what Northern Illinois does in the MAC. I mean, they could go undefeated, and it doesn't look such a terrible loss, but assuming that Northern Illinois is not great, when it comes down to it, if it's Notre Dame versus another team that may even have another loss, but not a bad loss. I mean, let's say an SEC team. I'm trying to think of an SEC team that might be on the margins. Texas A&M, just throw that out. I mean, it's funny because obviously they beat Notre Dame. I'll pick a different team.
You can throw an Ole Miss too.
Ole Miss, yeah, whatever.
Tennessee.
Maybe a fourth or fifth SEC team. And you go, well, they might have 3 losses, but they didn't lose to a Northern Illinois. That's going to be a very interesting test. It's kind of like the basketball selection when you've got, the so-called bad losses. But with football, you only play 12 games, so bad loss is magnified. And so I think this Northern Illinois loss is going to shadow Notre Dame all year. I just think that they can't afford another one. If they do, they're in a lot of trouble.
I would say this. I think that even maybe the bigger issue is not so much losing to Northern Illinois, but what it says of how good Notre Dame is. I mean, everyone's like, well, if they win out after this, they're still in. Well, what's the odds of them winning out if they're going to lose to a Northern Illinois? They're just not. you could say they're just not that good. I think what were they ranked before this? Fifth?
Yeah, that's crazy to me.
Well, yeah.
Well, they beat Texas A&M, so they had a quality win.
Yeah, so they did that, but I mean, was this just a one-off? You got to wonder. I mean, think if Ohio State had lost to Western Michigan or lost to Akron. Let's just say they lost to one of those two teams. You wouldn't be thinking that they're good enough to even, deserve to get
Right.
there. So that's kind of what we're looking at with ND.
Yeah,
Well,
it does portend problems for them but it's still the stakes just don't matter as much. They could bounce back.
Back to
Western playoff. But
I was just go ahead. I was just going to say back to Western Michigan, but if you got a playoff comment, go for
no,
it.
just back in a 4-team era, Notre Dame would be gone already. I mean, there's no way they would get in with a loss to Northern Illinois, unless there was complete chaos. I think this committee would take a 2-loss team over a Notre Dame team with a loss to Northern Illinois. But
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. They're still Notre Dame. They're still Notre Dame. I mean, not as much as they used to be, but they still have it. I mean, there's a reason Notre Dame has like this, special exemption to get into the playoff. They've got they have their own rules in a sense. Anyhow, what impressed you on the defensive side? And I know there was a lot of controversy over the Denzel Burke targeting call. I mean, my takeaway on that is when you get into targeting, they're told protect the player. So then you get into, once you get into that thing that protect the player is the main deal, it's hard to argue one way or the other whether, I think you can look whether it was crown of head. You can argue, whether he hit the shoulder or the head, but there's no question that it was helmet to helmet. Question gets into intent, and was he in a what do they call it, position, a
defenseless position.
But I don't have a problem with it in the sense of if player protection is number one, then these things are going to happen. It was unfortunate, but in a weird way, it also allowed Ohio State to show some depth.
Yeah, I actually, the thing that surprised me about it is that if you're going to get a targeting call, I thought it was going to be on Caleb Downs. He's the one who his helmet hit first. And then he hit, Downs hit the Akron or Western Michigan player, and then Burke hit the Western Michigan player. So I thought, well, I would have thought if they're going to call it, they would have called it on Downs, but they didn't. So the whole thing was kind of weird to me. And both players ducked their heads, the Western Michigan player and Downs and Burke. They all lowered their heads. It wasn't like one of them, like the classic targeting is like launching yourself into the guy. And when the other guy's upright and you hit him in the head, they're both lowering their heads. So I don't know. I'd be curious to talk to Bill Carolla from the Big Ten, their Big Ten officiating guy. He doesn't talk to people like me, but it'd be fascinating to have that conversation and say, okay, was that the right call? Because I don't know. I mean, again, I would have thought it had been Downs, not Burke.
I think in this case, because Downs hit him first, he was still moving and trying to pick up yardage. When Burke hit him the second time, he was already on his way down. So my understanding was from watching that replay is because he was already hit, he was considered defenseless. He was falling to the turf already. But targeting is so difficult to really know or evaluate. I saw somebody mention that it feels like Ohio State's always in the middle of these targeting calls, but I think it's just anytime you watch a college football game nowadays, there's always one or two of them, and it feels like that should be targeting and it's not called, or it's targeting and it's you're not sure it's targeting. So it feels like I never actually know what the rule is very well. So maybe it's like basketball where you're trying to officiate. It feels like anything could be a foul.
Well, one solution, easy solution, is don't lower your head. Don't. I mean, it goes back to like middle school football coaching. Keep your head up and wrap. I mean, I hate to sound like Spiels here, Chris Spielman. That was his big thing, head up, wrap, explode through the player. Don't lower your head and lead with your helmet. But that's coached. I think that's probably allowed, from the peewee level up now. They see it in the pros, and so they just don't. You've got to coach. You either have to allow that to happen in like lower level football, and then it just doesn't get corrected out of guys by the time they get to college. Or I don't know, but You just see a lot more launching and a lot more leading with your helmet than you did 25 years ago.
I mean, actually, I would disagree with that. I think you see less of it. I mean, Ohio State's kind of adopted the rugby style tackling that they've, I think the problem is the natural human instinct is to lower your head. I mean, that's just the natural thing to do when you're racing for contact. It's more of an unnatural thing to you have to learn and be trained to keep your head up. I think the natural thing is just to kind of go, oh, I'm going to get hit. I'm going to kind of scrunch up here. It's it's an unfortunate call. Fortunately for Ohio State, it didn't matter. I mean, it's a game that they won easily. Denzel Burke could, enjoy, in quotes, the game from the sidelines, watch Jermaine Matthews play a lot. But, if that were to happen against Michigan, oh boy.
Maybe not this year.
It's already been in the middle of some
the Sean Wade thing against Clemson. Joey Bosa, that Iowa game, was it Iowa or Purdue? I can't remember which game it was. The blowout. Nick Bosa got ejected for targeting. That was a huge play in that game.
That was a deserved call, though.
No, I'm not saying it wasn't. I had no issue with the call. I'm just saying that him getting ejected was basically that was the end of that game.
It's interesting. Anyhow, other observations defensively?
Well, I thought Caleb Downs made a couple plays that made you go, oh, that's Caleb Downs. There was one play where he lined up deep and he diagnosed the play right away and made a tackle, I think, for a loss that was like, where'd he come from? I mean, it was like a bullet. You talk about silver bullet. That was a silver bullet on that play. He made another one where I forget exactly the play, but I said, oh, that's Caleb Downs. I didn't have to see the number. That's Caleb Downs.
Yeah, he looked better, I thought, than he did last week. Just you felt him more. The plays Bill describes where he's lined up at the deep safety and just barrels ahead. But that makes him what he is. That's Caleb Downs in a nutshell. He just was able to diagnose stuff and knows what's happening, and then you combine that with good range as a safety, and he's gonna close pretty fast. They did have Cody Simon back. We mentioned Donovan Jackson being unavailable. Cody Simon did return, and I thought he showed a little something extra with on that first drive of the game, 3rd and 4. Jim Knowles dials up some pressure, and he gets into the backfield pretty quick. I mean, Tommy Eichenberg had that at times where they were able to send pressure and send him, and he was able to get at the quarterback. Cody Simon did that as well. That was a nice sack that kind of certainly set the tone for them early on.
So linebackers have 2 sacks now. Last year, in the whole season, they had 1. Tommy Eichenberg had 1 sack. Steele Chambers didn't have any. Nobody else had any. So already they've exceeded their sack total from linebackers. One small little thing I'd nitpick or think something they would point out, this might be an issue down the road. Davison Igbinosun, as we know, is a very aggressive player. He is also very handsy, and he got a pass interference call against Western Michigan. I remember I asked Jim Knowles when we had our thing before training camp. I said, "Do you have any issues with how aggressive he is, how handsy he is?" He said, "Nope, that's just the way he is." He's going to get some calls. He's going to get some pass interference and some holding calls, and you hope it doesn't happen at a point where it really hurts Ohio State. He's a very aggressive player. That's great. He's a very good player, but he probably could stand to not be as handsy at times because they're going to make that call. And if
I'm with Knowles fully in those situations. I think you take the bad with the good because there's more good than bad typically. To me, with penalties, the penalty you don't want are procedural stuff, legal formations, delay of game, somebody's lining up incorrectly, holding stuff. But I think on defense especially, you don't want guys to be too restrained. You want them to be able to be impactful. So I think you take a late hit there. You take the pass interference because they're playing aggressive. So I think you just take it. You have to accept that.
I think it's situational. If I'm an offensive team and it's 3rd and 15 against Ohio State, I throw a jump ball over to the sideline with Davis and Igbinosun and hope that I get a call. I mean, it's certain times, but other times there's just no need.
If that's the best call you have on third and long against Ohio State, I think Ohio State's going to be fine.
We'll see.
The other way to look at it is if he does it all the time, he's getting away with it more than he's getting called.
But you're putting yourself at risk.
Yeah, well, you always are. But whatever. We'll see. I mean, they've had problems in the past. That hasn't been their problem, their biggest problem. So
I agree. This is nitpicking. I mean, they were
Right.
close to flawless. I'm nitpicking. I mean, I'm not
We are
very good player. I'm not saying that he's a bad player. I'm just saying that's something that I think they should be more situational about.
Yeah, that's
speaking of nitpicking,
caveat. It's a nitpick.
yeah. Speaking of nitpicking, which I nitpicked a little bit, Will Howard looked really good. I was talking to somebody close to the program. I won't name him afterward, who said, "Yeah, he definitely looks at one side of the field, but that's not a big deal with the talent they have." So really was saying that as long as it's working, it's not a big deal. Question, of course, comes up when you're playing the better secondaries. But thoughts on that? I mean, I've been impressed with Howard. Obviously, his ability to run. I think he's made some good throws. He's missed. They're all going to miss. These guys aren't Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, so they're going to have misses. But he definitely, I would say, locks on or does not look off receivers and goes through his progressions yet. Again, he hasn't had to. The question becomes, can he, and how well he does that? Thoughts?
A lot of the times he's been throwing, they're running RPOs. And in those situations, he's not being asked to look at the full side of the field. In a lot of those situations, they're cutting off half the field, and he's making a quick read where he's either giving it to the back or he's pulling it and throwing to a Mecca. So I think to me, it's still circumstantial because he's not like he's being asked to do this long drop and survey for a bunch of time like Tom Brady with the Patriots. Chip, that is one, I think, difference we've kind of seen early on is how much run pass option stuff they've done and incorporated. So you'd probably need somebody smarter than any of us to walk us through those situations. But that's been my impression of watching him throw, where he's making a quick one read throw. That's how it's looked to me from my untrained eye.
That's fair. That's fair. And again, it hasn't been a problem yet. So don't beg, don't go looking for trouble. But it's just something I've kind of noticed. But it may be the RPO, Joey. I just said it's something to keep an eye on. That's all.
The only throw that he made that I think was just not a good throw was the underthrown pass to Jeremiah Smith. If he had led him, that'd have been a touchdown. The pass to Jelani Thurman was still catchable. It was a tough throw. There was pretty good coverage. He tried to layer it and just was not just. Jelani could have made that catch. He'd have been a great catch, but he could have made it. He made some really good out pattern throws. The kind that Kyle McCord was really good at. He made some of those on Saturday, deep down the field and to the sideline, which is a hard throw. You're throwing it not just vertically, but horizontally. And I wasn't sure he could make those throws, at least consistently. And so far he has. I think you're right, though, in the sense, Rob, that there are a couple of times he locks on, especially like 3rd and 8 or something, and he's going to throw to the tight end, or whatever it might be. There have been a couple of times he's thrown into tight coverage when maybe if he had looked off that guy, there might have been somebody else or somebody he could run, maybe could run. Again, we're in the nitpicking part of the podcast, but again, it's only a second game. He's going to get more comfortable. I thought it was telling that I think the first play of the game was a pass to the tight end, right? I mean, they were trying to get the tight ends involved in the offense. This is still 2 games into it, so we're going to see. But I think you have to be encouraged by what you've seen from Will Howard.
In that first opening play, he said he could have probably handed the ball off the Travion. That was another RPO instance, but pulled it and then dumped off the G Scott. He said he liked getting some of those easy ones to settle him in, and he took advantage of them.
I think he's really enjoying his time as a Buckeye. I think you can sense that. I'm not sure how much Kyle McCord enjoyed last year. I think he felt always under the gun by hadn't quite.
Bill, for the record, that's 2 references to Kyle McCord for the record in this podcast.
Okay, well, there could have been.
You have to mention him at least 5 times for legitimate podcast.
Look, to Kyle McCord's credit, he's gotten off to a great start at Syracuse, and it's been a win-win. But you threw me off my train of thought. I never felt like Kyle McCord was having fun last year. It was like trying to prove himself both to everybody and maybe especially his coach. I get the sense that Will Howard's like a kid in the candy store. As like the pressure, as he told me for this profile, wrote, pressure is a privilege. The C.J. Stroud line, I think it's actually a Billie Jean King line. He's really enjoying this. He stands at the podium and he kind of jokes around a little bit. He joked about last week how hot it was in the interview room. He just seems very at ease and just enjoying this because he had such an up and down career at Kansas State where he never felt like he was ever the guy. It was never his team in the sense that he was assured of being the guy if he had a slump or something. And I think he feels like, as he said, I feel like I'm pinching myself. And that's actually before he started playing, before the season started. So imagine how he's feeling now. And that's a really important thing. You want a quarterback to have that spirit about him, and he does.
Yeah, I think
before we wrap up, go ahead.
Being the quarterback at Ohio State, sort of like being handed the keys to a Ferrari, and you probably have two instincts if you are handed the keys to a Ferrari. Oh boy, I get to drive really fast and have fun, or please, I hope I don't crash it. And it feels like both these quarterbacks had different ideas on how they would like to drive said sports car.
Speaking of quarterbacks, 4, is that right? 4 got into the game for Ohio State, which is unheard of. Or was it 5? It was 4, right?
Yeah.
You had.
Honestly, yeah. I didn't even notice that Lincoln Kingholtz got in.
Yeah, he got in.
Writing. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice that.
Who took the kneel down? Because Mason Magg shows up in the box score.
He got a carry as a running back, so maybe he's their like 5th running back. You got the 2 freshmen.
We haven't addressed that. The depth. They got guys in the game. That's only going to help.
Yeah, guys in the game.
And they got guys in the game and actually had them throw the ball. Like Julian Sain got it and did more than hand off. There was a 4th and 1, and he kept it on the RPO and threw to Bennett Christian for a touchdown. So sometimes you see the backups play, but they're just trying to milk clock and hand the ball off. Maybe this is the advantage to having Chip Kelly as the play caller, where Day goes over to the post-game handshake with the other coach, and he can maybe feign ignorance a little bit. And hey, Chip called that, or Julian pulled the ball. Like, what am I supposed to do there? But I like that philosophy because to me, I mean, these are guys who are practicing all week. They put in a bunch of hours, the off-season conditioning, the daily grind to it all. So if they get in the game, it's nice for them to actually get to play football rather than just having the idea like, let's get out of here.
Yeah. Speaking of getting out of here.
Hey, one more. We'll add to the nitpick sessions. I want to bring up one, but Jaden Ballard as a returner had the goofy one to start the second half where the ball bounced and he caught a fair catch. Ohio State ended up getting the ball at the 6-yard line, and then they had a muff punt in the fourth quarter. Brandon Ennis gave them a lot as a punt returner so far. I'm curious how long Ballard will remain the kickoff returner. I don't know. Feels like they could get more. It was a reminder that all the issues with special teams have not gone away in 1 week.
Yeah. Well,
that does it. Recap of Ohio State's 56-0 win over Western Michigan. I'm Joey Kaufman. That was Bill Rabinowitz and Rob Oller. Thanks for making the Buckeye Extra football podcast part of your listening diet. And we'll be back after the idle week. The Buckeyes are off on Saturday, return September 21st against Marshall. Thanks for listening.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.